Dave and I had been married for about 4 years when we decided it was time to expand our little family. I met Dave at a deposition at the health insurance company I worked for. He was the lead attorney for the plaintiff, and I was one of the henchmen defending the defendant. Dave was, and still is, a brilliant attorney, a fast-paced partner destined to make millions in the pursuit of justice. While I am a competent attorney, I would not claim to be in his class, and so I was surprised to hear from him shortly after the lawsuit was settled. I quickly discovered that over numerous dinners, courtships, drinks, dances, and activities, he was a witty and charming companion. Sex was everything we could both want. Dave was an inventive and attentive lover, and nature blessed me with a passionate and responsive body. Marriage followed, and we settled into one of those ubiquitous gated communities that seem to sprout like weeds all over Long Island, at least for the wealthy who have a few million to buy a 4-bedroom ranch that was too expensive in price and too big for the two of us. But we had room to grow, and we had room for an au pair in case I wanted to go back to work. Like many privileged couples, we were living the American dream with more money than a young couple could reasonably expect, and at times it seemed that the only problem we faced was the number of hours Dave worked. Although we were both lawyers, my job was more of a 9-to-5 office job, while he spent a lot of time looking for the almighty partnership. So I often had to attend the endless meetings, barbecues, dinners, wine tastings, and general neighborhood gatherings that living in a gated community entailed. It was during the many gatherings of this nature that I became friends with Joanna, and, by extension, her husband Walter. The couple intrigued me, and since I had some free time, I was on vacation in the last month of my pregnancy and decided to find out what I could. No, I didn't hire a private investigator or dig into their personal life. I just befriended Joanna since she wasn't working and lived only 2 houses away from us. I was intrigued. It was a mystery. Walter, I realized, was a CPA and had his own small firm. Oddly enough, unlike some of the other businessmen in the neighborhood, he never seemed to seek new business or try to make connections. He looked like an accountant, mid-40s, balding, a little overweight, though I wouldn't call him fat. He didn't look like he ever had an athletic body, just a bookish, nerdy personality type, about 5'8" tall, and he often had a slightly aloof or confused demeanor. He never seemed to completely fit in with the guys. He didn't golf, fish, or drink, and yet he wasn't the stereotypical alpha male that our little community was teeming with. He also seemed, oddly enough for a married man, somewhat shy in the presence of women. Always polite, always a gentleman, but without flaunting it, he mostly blended in with the woodwork. Joanna, on the other hand, was beautiful, lively, vivacious, flirtatious, about 35, but looked younger and was totally devoted to Walter. She had a smile that put the Mona Lisa to shame, a body that on my best day I could never hope to compete with, breasts the size of small pineapples, probably enlarged, and a mysterious sultriness about her that just screamed for sex. I'd only seen her angry twice. Once when some men mocked Walter in her presence and she verbally chewed them out so they slipped away with their tails tucked, and the other time when one of the local Lotharios tried his tricks on her. I think he was happy to escape with his testicles intact. But she made it clear, loudly and publicly, that if he or anyone else tried it again, immediate pain would follow. What she had was meant for Walter, and no one else. She was clearly, sometimes to the point of nausea, in love with Walter. This was obvious to all of us, except, oddly enough, perhaps Walter himself, who somehow seemed a little indifferent to the whole thing. He clearly loved her, treated her wonderfully and with respect, seemed totally devoted to her, but was foolish enough to miss the clues the rest of us saw. Or maybe, having lived with it for so long, he just accepted it as natural. Like I said, they lived 2 houses down, so they had money to live here, but they didn't seem to have the toys that were so conspicuous in the rest of the neighborhood. The cars were ordinary, nothing special. There were no boats in the yard, no 90-inch TV screens, no mahogany lattice rooms that others bragged about. They had a nice yard with a pool, a regular-sized BBQ like most houses around here, but nothing ostentatious. I'd never heard her complain about being tight on money, but she certainly wasn't into the latest designer fashions. She didn't wear much jewelry, a modest but decent engagement ring, a gold wedding band, and the ubiquitous pair of gold earrings that looked exactly like 2 little cylinders. I think they had money for toys, They just didn't need to compete by showing them off. They had 2 children, a 6-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. Both were sweet little, well-behaved children, and both their mother and father obviously had a heart for them. They had a Hispanic girl who watched them, sort of a combination of maid and nanny, and Joan, who was a stay-at-home mom. But even so, they were perfectly normal. I understood that the son attended one of the best private schools in the area, but nothing special since he was only 6 years old. His mom drove him to school and picked him up afterward. His dad was at work and the nanny was babysitting. At that point, I was about 8 months into my pregnancy, and I had taken a leave of absence from work. I was used to going for a walk every morning to try and stretch out a bit, although I kept pretty close to home. So I was out early when I saw Joan leaving to take her son to school. We chatted for a bit, and I invited her over for coffee after she got home. She had a whole morning planned. Drop her son off, go to the gym, then go shopping. But she promised to stop by around lunchtime for coffee and a chat. I knew there was some story just waiting to be told, but I didn't expect to hear it today. I was wrong. Joanna came by a little later, and we were sitting around drinking coffee and chatting about pregnancy and babies in general when I asked her if she was planning on having more children. "It's up to Walter. Whatever he wants, I'll do. If he wants more, we'll have more. If not, we won't." I noticed that she was twirling her little gold earring with her fingers as she said this, a nervous habit I'd seen her have several times when something concerned Walter. "Of course, you have to be a part of this decision, too. I mean, this isn't the 19th century. It's not like he can force you to get pregnant. No, Walter would never do that. He's really nice, and I couldn't hope for a nicer man to marry. It's not like he would ever make me do anything. It's just that I would do anything at all, to make sure he's happy, and that includes having kids, not having kids, or whatever he wants." "You really love him that much, don't you? We've all seen the way you act with him. Like he's God's gift to women, and you've won a prize with the way you treat him. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it until I met you two. And yet he seems a little clueless at times, like he doesn't understand what you do for him. And hopefully he never will," she said, twirling her earring again. I looked at her a little hard, as that was strange to hear. "You don't want him to know how much you love him?" "It's not so much about that, it's just that it's a little hard to explain. Let me ask you a question, Roberta. You're a lawyer. If I told you something, could you keep it confidential like a lawyer to a client?" "I could if you hired me." "Are you in some kind of trouble? Is Walter hurting you or threatening you?" "No, nothing like that. I just have a story I want to tell, and I'd like to tell it to someone just in case, but no one can know about it. What do I have to do to hire you?" "It's easy enough. Just give me something like $10 as an advance, and we can make an oral contract establishing attorney-client privilege." She grabbed her purse, pulled out a 20, held it out to me, and smiled. "Consider yourself hired." "I grew up on Long Island, but not in this part of it," she began. "My father was a roofer, and half of what he earned he spent at the bar. So we never had much money. My mom worked as a hairdresser and brought something home, but we definitely belonged to the lower class, nothing like this neighborhood. Because of his drinking, cheating, and their fights, it's a wonder I graduated from high school, but I did, and managed to spend some time in secretarial school. I was working at a lousy agency, filling out paperwork and short-term assignments, when I met Walter. His secretary was going on maternity leave, and they hired me to replace her, so I was sort of second fiddle." "When was this?" "Just about 10 years ago. I was 24 and had had enough of partying and started looking around for someone to start a family with. I'll admit I was a bit of a mercurial little bitch. My thought was to get a wealthy husband for a few years and then move on with a decent income, and Walter seemed like the perfect fit for that. He was 32 then, 8 years older than me, and even more ignorant and inexperienced than he is today. I didn't think he was rich, but he had his own business, a nice apartment in a good part of town, and he seemed perfect for the role of primary husband. I started dating him after my time at his office was up and soon moved in with him. About a year later, we were married. Walter was sweet and accommodating, and I thought I could control him as much as I needed to. He was also completely trusting and never asked for a prenup. I'm not proud of being a gold digger, but I won't regret it either. And yet here you are, 10 years later and still happily married." "Yes, I am. We had a pretty normal engagement." My only condition for marrying him was that I wanted a house, a real house that we could call our own. I had lived in rented apartments all my life, so we looked around and chose the one we have now. I thought it was a little pricey, but Walter wanted a place for the kids, and even though I had no intention of having kids, I didn't want to disappoint him before we got married. The good news for me was that he didn't even blink when he saw the price, and he had no problem putting my name on the document. However, shortly before we got married, one event happened that, although I didn't give any real significance at the time, I later realized it was probably the most significant event of my life. What was it? A few weeks after we got engaged, Walter said he wanted us to have dinner with an old high school friend of his. We went to a little restaurant I had never been to in Little Italy, one of those quiet family places, but upscale. When we walked in, I had a strange feeling, like you were just entering someone's home, not a public place where no one cared about you. Walter had a quick word with the maitre d', told him who we were meeting, and everything changed. We were escorted to the best table, and 5 minutes later, the host was there with a complimentary bottle of his best wine. The service after that was amazing. We had 2 waiters the whole time, and we barely had to do more than blink before they were at the table. We had eaten most of our dinner, and Walter's friend still hadn't shown up when 2 large men walked in and seemed to look around the entire restaurant. Then one left and the other took a seat a little behind us. Then the first returned with 2 other men, one of whom was very well dressed and about the same age as Walter, and the other much older. Walter stood up, hugged them both, and introduced me to his friend Tony and Tony's grandfather, Tony Salvatore. These 2 were nothing like Walter at all. I asked him about it later, and he claimed Tony was just an old high school friend of his. In any case, they didn't stay long. The old man made a short toast, and they drank to the success of our wedding. Tony gave me an early wedding present, a beautiful pair of diamond earrings that I later estimated at $10,000, and everyone hugged before they left. None of them came to the wedding, and I didn't see Tony for another 2 years. So, as they say, life went on. From the excitement of getting married, moving, buying furniture, and setting up our house, I completely forgot about that dinner. Walter went to work every day, but never seemed so ambitious. I asked him several times if he wanted to bring in new clients and expand his business, but he said he preferred what he had. Money was never an issue. I had no idea how much he actually had, but he never complained about the price of anything I wanted to buy, no matter how high it was. So, are you settled in marital bliss? Let's just say we're settled in marital bliss. Walter is a sweet, kind, gentle man, but sometimes a girl wants a little more than tenderness in the bedroom. When I dated before I was married, I had a few guys who liked to ride me hard, and it just wasn't Walter, and honestly, I missed it. Back then, I wasn't ready to give up on marriage to Walter, at least not until I had some idea of what he was worth, so I knew I had to be careful. But the need for something brighter was there. I wasn't going to do anything at home. There are too many prying eyes in our neighborhood, so I joined a gym. I really wanted to work out and keep my body in shape, but I remembered to hire a cute personal trainer. Christopher was busting my ass, pushing me to my limits at the gym, and eventually got me interested in him as a man. He was half Italian, about 6'1" tall, and his body was as hard as metal. We embarked on a wonderful romance, meeting at hotels several times a week for a day of fun and games. His stamina was incredible, and he gave me what I was missing. So, you had an affair. Did Walter ever find out about it? No, he never knew, but it did end amazingly badly in a way that you can't imagine worse. One day, Walter had to be away for 2 days and 2 nights for work, so Chris and I decided to get a hotel room for the night. We had never done this before. We usually just took an hour or 2 during the day, so this was going to be a new treat for both of us. I don't remember much. I think we were both drugged in some way. Just sometime in the evening, some stout men forced us into a car and drove us to a remote warehouse. I know Chris was in the business of selling steroids or something, so I assumed it had something to do with that, and I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it didn't look good. Are you saying you were kidnapped? What happened? How did you get out of it, and did Walter find out? I noticed that her voice seemed to take on an even monotone tone as she told me this story, as if she was detaching herself from everything that was going on. Between that and the details she was giving, it was a little unnerving. When the drugs wore off, I found myself tied to a chair. They used bandages to wrap around my arms and legs so they wouldn't leave any marks, plus some more wrapped around my mouth so I couldn't scream. For some reason, they were extra careful not to mark me in any way. Chris, on the other hand, was handcuffed and suspended by his wrists with a rope that was tied to a beam under the ceiling. My chair was facing him. Two men came out and roughly ripped off his clothes, tearing his shirt around his handcuffed wrists. They spread a large piece of plastic sheeting under him and began beating him, over and over, with large, heavy chains. I could see blood splattering the tape and dripping from his wrists, where the handcuffs crashed into him as they beat him. They just kept beating him as he screamed over and over. She was silent for a moment and shuddered before continuing in the same even tone. After a while, Chris stopped screaming. I think thankfully he passed out. His body was drenched in blood. One ear was partially torn off. His nose was flattened and blood was still dripping from it. His eyes were swollen and closed. A forklift pulled up with two 55-gallon drums on a pallet and some kind of bolt cutter with a long handle. They pulled Chris up higher and put one of the barrels under him. Then one of the men put the bolt cutter over his tool and balls and cut them off. I remember the blood spurting as they fell into the barrel. They must have let go of the rope, and as Chris fell into the barrel, they closed the lid and hammered it shut. Then they rolled up the tape, put it and the cutter in another barrel, and drove them away. A few minutes later, the forklift returned with two new barrels. I remember thinking I was going to be next, and I passed out. I just sat and listened, mesmerized by her story. I had never heard a story like this before, and even in my wildest dreams, I had not expected such a turn of events. She continued, "A little later I woke up, still tied to the chair. There was another chair across from me, and sitting on it was Walter's friend Tony. He had one of the men remove the blindfold from my mouth and one arm. I just sat there frozen and stared at him. He pulled a flask out from under his coat and held it out to me. I remember sucking on it and coughing a little. Whatever it was strong, but I needed it. It was cold where we were, and I wasn't really dressed, and the alcohol warmed me from the inside out." Tony started to speak in a steady voice. "Joanna, we're going to have a little talk, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that for me, Joanna? If you do, we'll soon forget about this, and you can come home safe and sound." I just nodded at him. "Does Walter know about this man you've been seeing?" "No, I don't think so. I tried to make sure he never found out." "Is there any chance that this man got you pregnant?" "No, I'm on the pill. I'm not ready to have children yet." "Does Walter know you're on birth control?" "No, he doesn't." "Do you love your husband, Joanna? Do you think you can make him happy?" "Yes, I do, and yes, I know I can make him happy. I'm so sorry this happened. I just had to—" He held up his hand and stopped me. "I'm not sure if you know this, but your husband is one of the most magnificent people I know. If he wanted to, he could be a brilliant writer or scientist. He's a financial genius. Yet he has a small office and apparently very few clients. Those clients include my family and some of our friends and business associates. We also provide his services for a fee to several cartels that do business in our country. But despite these abilities, or maybe because of them, Walter is a bit of an oddball. We realize that and just want to see him happy. There are a lot of people who want to see him happy, and they're willing to go to extreme measures, as you could see today, to make sure that happens. We think you can help make him happy." "I know I can make Walter happy. I really love him." "Let's not have any secrets between us. I talk to Walter often, and he loves you completely. He sees you as the perfect wife and mother of his children, and I don't want to see him disappointed. We both know you're a gold digger, but what you don't know is that Walter has a lot more gold than you ever imagined. But if you try to get it, there are too many people who will be upset about it for you to ever enjoy the moment. After a while, my friends will make sure you get home safely. Walter won't even need to know about this little incident. Wait a month to be sure, then throw away the birth control pills and give Walter the children he wants. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, I can. I hope I never see you again, because if I do, you're not gonna like it. There's 1,000 ways for you to die, from a car accident to a robbery, and Walter will never know the real reason. Just know that before that, you'll spend your time here in hell. Don't ever give me a reason to talk to you again. Don't ever give me a reason to think you're doing something that could cause Walter unhappiness." We both just sat in silence, me too shocked to speak, and Joanna perhaps too excited by what she had told me. Then she finished the story. Walter never knew what happened. I never let him find out. I spend every moment of every day trying to please him as if my life depended on it, because it did. About a month after that, I got a box in the mail. Inside were the earrings you see me wearing and a card signed by Tony. I wear them every day to remember. What are these earrings? She took one off and held it out to me. There, cast in perfect miniature, was a 55-gallon gold barrel.